Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today, we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Quester SA. You can't get quarters from bug bites. Let's jump right in. When I was in the army, my unit had a training day one day where we did tactical movements and close quarters combat with paintball pew-pews. It was pretty fun, except it was in Texas in the middle of the summer in a training area full of tall grass that I ended up crawling around in a lot. I didn't notice any problems until a couple hours later when I was getting ready to head home and my legs started burning. I pulled my boots off and rolled my pants up, and my feet and legs up to my mid-thigh were swollen and covered in hundreds of angry red welts. Apparently, I'd crawled through a nest of berry bugs, tiny biting bugs common in America that are apparently called Trombiculidae officially, and they'd gone to town on my legs, bad enough to provoke an allergic reaction. I drive myself to the emergency room at the base hospital, and while I'm waiting to be seen and feeling more and more terrible but needing to focus on something else, I started counting the bites. I stopped when I got to 100, and that was just on the inside of my right calf. The doc had never seen anything like it, and I ended up getting a massive dose of steroids, antibiotics, and anti-inflammatories, all hospital grade and with serious side effects all of their own, as well as 4 days of quarters, the military equivalent of being told to stay home and don't come into work. My girlfriend came and picked me up from the hospital and drove me home because at that point I was in no state to drive myself between the allergic reaction and the meds I was on to treat it. On the way home, I called to my sergeant to let him know about my situation so he can get word up the chain of command. About an hour after that, I get a call from the first sergeant, the senior most NCO in the unit herself. Now, she was one of the most incompetent first sergeants I ever worked with during my time in the army, constantly making terrible decisions, mindlessly green-lighting whatever terrible decision our equally incompetent captain came up with, and micromanaging people unnecessarily. She told me that my quarters has been revoked by the captain and that I have to come in the following day. I tell her that I'm holding orders in my hand from a doctor who's also a lieutenant colonel that I'm supposed to take time off to recover. She responds with, "You can't get quarters from bug bites," and rants at me that I'm just malingering and trying to get out of work. There was no way I could possibly get seriously ill from just some bug bites. I tried to explain that I'd had an allergic reaction, but she wasn't having it, insisting I was a liar and bad soldier because of it. I was to be at formation the next morning at 0900. Because of the extensive exercise we all got at the training event, they'd canceled PT for the day with my supposed quarter slip, and they would decide then if they were going to punish me more for trying to pull this stunt. Cue malicious compliance. Okay, I wore my PT uniform, a t-shirt and shorts, rather than our fatigues the next day, and had my girlfriend drive me in. I was still too messed up from the bites and meds to drive. I figured if I was going to get in trouble anyways, being in the wrong uniform would be the least of my worries. But my bare legs instead showed off the literal hundreds of now angrily red, almost purple or black in some cases, huge welts on my leg. The skin was more welt than not by the next morning. And I walked up showing off that rather horrific sight to my entire company of more than 100 enlisted NCOs and officers. Literally everyone who sees me is like, JFCOP, what the F happened to your legs? It's clear to every single person in the company that I am actually legitimately having an allergic reaction just by sight alone. The first sergeant hears people making a ruckus, sees me, and turns bright red, knowing she effed up when she hears me answering warrant officers, including my direct supervisor, asking, "Why are you here if you're that sick?" With, "First sergeant made me come in and told me that you can't get quarters because of bug bites." Within 10 minutes, I've handed in a copy of my quarter slip, gotten a quiet and very private apology from the first sergeant, and was sent home for the next 4 days. I'm not sure which route I would have taken in this malicious compliance, whether it would have been going in the next day, or the next day going back to that lieutenant colonel doctor and saying, "Hey, is a non-medical first sergeant allowed to counteract your medical orders? Aren't they supposed to respect your superior knowledge, specialization, and your rank?" Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Zero Gravity 94. Boss helps abusive employee accidentally fire herself. Let's jump right in. I originally posted this under Pro Revenge, but was told it would be better suited here. Here is the post. This isn't my personal story, but it happened to a friend at his company, and I thought it was hilarious. The main characters are my friend Patrick, male, then 26, Allie, female, then 29, and Boss, male, older. Patrick and Allie worked at the same company in the same division under Boss. Allie was abusive to all the employees in the division, but especially to Patrick, because he was the newcomer and he was talented, and he didn't suck up to her. Her bullying tactics included, but were not limited to, taking credit for other people's ideas, convincing Patrick that the others in the division didn't like him, attempting to ruin the careers of anyone who didn't suck up to her, by preventing them from getting assigned to cool new projects, and, last and worst, trying to get Patrick fired, which she almost succeeded in doing. She was so horrible to Patrick that his mental health suffered a decline. Everyone was vaguely aware of her behavior, but she hid the worst parts, so it was never quite obvious or bad enough to get her fired. Plus, she was also popular with the company's clients who didn't know, and she was a favorite of one of the top people at the company. Allie seemed untouchable until several months after the Patrick almost gets fired incident, when the company started having a conversation about moving some of their employees to contract positions. Becoming a contractor would have its pros and cons. Contractors would pay for their own health insurance and would have no job security, being hired for individual contracts rather than a permanent employment position. But they would also be allowed to work for other companies. It was a great move for someone who was well known and wanted more visibility and options, but a lousy move for someone lower on the totem pole. Allie, who was somewhat of a narcissist who believed she was destined for greatness, waltzed into Boss's office and told him she wanted to switch to a contractor position. She believed the company couldn't get by without her and would continue hiring her while she also got to work for other companies and gain fame and visibility within the industry. Boss was all smiles and pretended to be supportive of her. This is a great career move. Think of all the options you'll have. As soon as the paperwork was signed, he never hired her for a single contract, and her future with the company, the best one in the city for this particular industry, was ruined. Allie eventually found employment elsewhere, but it wasn't as good as the position she'd left. Patrick found out the second part of the story years later. He was under the impression, because of what Allie had said, and how people avoided him because they knew Allie didn't like him, that no one was on his side, and that his coworkers and Boss had actually liked her. They hadn't. Turns out, Boss felt his hands were tied because she was a favorite of one of the top people at the company, but as soon as she gave him an out that allowed him to never have to work with her again, he took it. Gotta be honest here, if the boss hands you a rope, it's completely up to you whether you climb that rope up to a better position or you metaphorically hang yourself with it. And you guys knew this one was coming, but I think what she got was right up her alley. Our next story today comes to us from Andy K2. Dear Flatmate, I will follow your instructions to the letter. Let's jump right in. Hi folks, surely not the best story out there, but I hope you like it anyway. I live in France, but I come from another European country. One of my flatmates, let's call him Pierre, can be hard to deal with. He spent around 1 year abroad working, and thus he considers his English skills nearly impeccable. To be fair, his English is okay, but far from flawless. This will be important later. In addition to this, one of his worst traits is that sometimes he seems to have an urge to correct any teeny tiny imperfection in your statements. I guess just to show you that you're wrong and he knows better. An example? New Zealand is on the opposite side of the world. Pierre says, well, technically on the other side of the world there's water. New Zealand is on the opposite side from Spain, not France. Discussion not quoted verbatim, but should give you the idea. One specific episode leading to the malicious compliance left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I was going to do a very simple hike with some friends, and he stopped me while I was putting my running shoes on, almost ready to exit. Oh, hello, where are you going? I'm doing an easy hike nearby with some friends, want to join? Nah, I do not have running shoes, I will buy some and join you next week. Okay, but be careful, because next week we're planning on going hiking in the Alps. You might want to consider buying trekking shoes, not running shoes. Well, the Alps where? You know, they extend from southern France to Austria. He had a grin on his face as if to say, I gotcha. His response got me in the wrong way, and I rudely yelled back something in the likes of, oh come on, you know what I mean. It must be noted that we live approximately 1 hour away from the Alps, and while yes, Alps are huge and range from France to Slovenia, his remark was undoubtedly unnecessary. I quit the flat huffing and went looking for my car. On the way there, I thought that maybe I was too harsh with him. I texted him in English, since in the conversation above he addressed to me using it rather than French. My message was, hey, sorry for my reaction before. I did not like your comment, but I should have responded more calmly. He answered back with, haha, it's okay bro. Just remember that I'm an accountant and you must be precise with me. Unfortunately, I am a little touchy, and him not apologizing at all made me go into bitter mode. Few days later, I was still salty and received a message from Pierre in English. The message said, hi, can you put a beer on the fridge for tonight? I read it once again, and a voice in my head whispered part of the message he sent me days before. You must be precise with me. So I grabbed a bottle of his beers and placed it on top of our fridge. He must have forgotten his request because he did not ask me about the beer, and a few months later, the bottle was still up there, visible only by climbing on a chair. At least I had a good laugh showing it to every friend coming to visit me. Okay, wait a second here. I thought this malicious compliance was going to be sending him off to a way distant part of the Alps so he can go climbing on his own, nowhere near where everybody else was. And then the beer thing came in and I was like, wait, what? Our next story today comes to us from Bully WYF. Frosty strikes back. Let's jump right in. This is my second winter in my house, and while last year I went pretty low-key because we were still moving in and didn't have any landscaping done, this year the kids begged me to put up Frosty, and because I didn't have any excuses this time, I set it up. Now, for some background about Frosty, our property, and the neighbor. Frosty is one of those 10-foot tall inflatables you get from Canadian Tire or Walmart. He's a bit much to be honest, but makes the 3 kids happy, so it is what it is. It's also probably his last year in service because he's a bit threadbare this year. I live in the burbs where the homes are honestly too close together, 3 to 4 feet apart, but we didn't have a lot of choice in the matter when we bought. One side of my property ends right at the edge of the house, and the other side of the property butts up against the neighbor's house. There is a specific name for this style of subdivision, but I don't recall it. How this works out is there's a 3 to 4 foot gap between driveways on one side and a 6 to 8 foot gap between driveways on the other side. I placed Frosty on the larger of the 2 gaps, more on my side of the front yard, but over the property line a little, mostly 2 guide wires to make sure Frosty doesn't blow away. To be perfectly clear, when he deflated, I made sure he wouldn't touch the neighbor's driveway, walkway, or vehicles. I thought I gave him absolutely nothing to complain about. Now, my neighbor is mostly a nice guy, definitely could be worse, but is a bit high-strung. Did his yard landscaping like what you would find on Pinterest, mows his yard in a diagonal pattern so it's almost like a piece of art. Wife once said to me he would fit in perfectly in a stereotypical HOA that you read about here on Reddit. Doesn't do Halloween, doesn't set up outside Christmas decorations, steers clear of all of that. Bit stiff, but overall still a nice guy. So I set up Frosty last weekend and didn't turn on the timer until about 2 days ago because we were getting a lot of snow and I didn't want him getting buried. Yesterday, the neighbor comes over to politely complain about Frosty. It's technically on his yard, he's worried it's going to damage the yard, doesn't want to be that guy, but needs me to move it. We talk a bit and I try to get him to relax on this. It makes my kids really happy. There's not enough room on the other side of the driveway. It's very firmly secured and difficult to remove, etc. But no deal, he wants it moved. He also doesn't say it, but based on the way he's talking and previous conversations with him, he thinks it's tacky. So I agree, you are technically correct, I'll move it to the backyard. So it's now set up in the backyard in plain sight of his rear windows, looking over the fence. Even angled it a bit so it's looking right at his house instead of mine. If he looks into the backyard, Frosty is waving. Having dinner, Frosty says hello. And he won't have a thing to complain about because it won't be touching the fence or anything else on his property. OP, you surely haven't done enough in this situation. I think Frosty needs some friends to look over that fence as well. And if they don't come with their own lights, then you need to set up some spotlights there as well, just to make sure that they're perfectly visible. It's for the kids, right? Our last story today comes to us from PNG, this guy. A story from Oman. I helped HR move someone along. Let's jump right in. Omani nationals have major labor law protections, particularly if they work in oil and gas, one of the major industries there. I was posted to Oman for a project and discovered that a very small number of the locals use this protection for their own benefit. They basically slack off, claim they need to go to funerals for endless aunts, claim the wadi is flooded, and basically avoid work. Because of the labor law, you can't fire them without a court case on your hands, and foreign companies don't want to go in front of an Omani magistrate. It was common for fired Omani nationals to be paid out years of severance as a penalty to their bad foreign bosses. If they resigned, this was not the case. When I got to Muscat, I discovered we had inherited one of these clowns. He was doing it all and unfortunately was also technically incompetent. I spoke to HR and they said, we can't do anything. I asked for a copy of the HR law for Oman and read it. I then spoke to the chap in question and discovered he was interested in training and traveled to the USA to our headquarters. Now, one thing, no one there liked fieldwork, they avoided it like the plague, but this chap agreed he would do the fieldwork first if he could go to the States after. HR witnessed this. Two things then happened. Under Oman labor law, we were allowed to assign field techs to the field only on an equal time basis, for every day in the field, 1 day in the office. But there was curiously no upper limit in the law as to how long you could send someone for a contiguous period provided it was equal time within the year. HR said, oh, it's customary no more than 2 weeks. I asked if this was in his contract and they said no. I then said, okay, I'm assigning this chap to 180 days in the field so we can then send him to the USA for 180 days. HR looked at me as though I was mad, but I insisted it was legal. They double-checked and said, okay, seems legal. I told the chap the next day he came in, since you agreed to go to the USA, we are sending you for 6 months. However, you need to go into the field for 6 months, leaving tomorrow, to a nasty desert camp. He resigned on the spot. HR came in and privately congratulated me. Turned out they'd been trying to get rid of the chap for 5 years. Where's the malicious compliance? I complied completely to the letter of the law in a malicious manner. I completely thought this one was going to go in a different direction as well. I thought this person was going to go to the United States and be terminated there with cause because the employment laws are very different in the US than they are in Oman. Another wonderful thing here is that you've educated HR, now they know how to get rid of people, and I'm guessing they'd probably use that again in the near future. Check out all 5 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.